Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. I'm Amanda and I'll be your host for this and all episodes of the show. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by FavYogis. Do you teach privately? Make payment and registration a breeze. Use the FavYogis app to create and manage classes for your personal clients. Life is just easier with autopay. You can forget about remembering to Venmo, or if you're up in Canada, sending an invoice, an e-transfer, or a PayPal, depending on where your clients are in the world. With FavYogis, you can use autopay to enable repeating payments. This will save you so much time and make things so much easier. You can also keep your calendars in sync. Google Calendar integration automatically updates teacher and student classes when you make changes. It's still just your yoga. Teachers add classes, students add teachers and students stay connected. Head on over to the App Store and find FavYogis, FavYogis. Use code MBOM and let them know that I sent you. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you in part by PunchPass. PunchPass is a simple-to-use booking software. If you are a yoga teacher or a small yoga business that's been looking for an option to have all of their bookings in one place where you can take payments, schedule classes, see who's coming to your classes, and more, PunchPass is a really awesome option. They have top-notch customer service, and the best part about it is that they're a small business just like you and I. They're made for you guys. So you can head on over to punchpass.com/MBOM and give them a free trial. The best part about the trial is that you don't even have to add a credit card. And if you do decide that you want to work with them later on, they have 3 awesome pricing packages that really help you choose what is going to be best for you. So head on over to punchpass.com/MBOM and check them out. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you in part by Offering Tree. When you're a yoga teacher and you're trying to build your digital presence, it can be daunting. First, you might need a website. There are a lot of great tools for building websites like WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace. Then you need a way to email your students. Again, there are tools for that like MailChimp and Constant Contact. But that's another account to pay for and another password to remember. Then you need a way to schedule and register your students. Again, there are tools for that, but it's another account to create and pay for and another password to remember. Oh wait, how do I integrate my scheduling tool with my website? Arrgh! Instead of putting all of this stuff off for another day because it's too daunting, let me tell you about a better way. Offering Tree set out to make creating your digital presence fun, easy, and affordable. With one account, you can create a website in minutes that has your schedule built right in. They also have email marketing tools to collect email addresses, send newsletters, and automated emails to your subscribers. It all works seamlessly together with one account and one subscription. To learn more about what Offering Tree can do for your digital presence, visit offeringtree.com/MBOM. Offering Tree has been supporting MBOM for close to a year now. And not only are they really changing the game for yoga teachers, making yoga business easy, they're also just really awesome people. They're a small business just like me, probably just like you. And I love that when I get to meet with them, I'm talking right with the co-founders. They're in it every single day, busting their butts to make a product that's really great. And I feel that when I use it. Offering Tree is providing special pricing for MBOM listeners, so be sure to visit offeringtree.com/MBOM to receive your discount. All right, now on to today's episode of the podcast. I am very excited to be joined by Kristine Weber from Subtle Yoga. And Kristine has a really interesting background. She's been teaching yoga for almost 25 years and training yoga teachers since 2003. She's also been training mental health professionals to use yoga with their clients since 2009. And her business really came from when she started yoga, everyone was teaching very rigorous, more asana-based. And she started learning about more of the neuroscience, the impact on the nervous system, and how, part of what we need in society body is to have ways to impact the nervous system. And so a lot of what we talk about on this episode is around how, there's so many people in the world that are suffering from different types of diseases or illnesses, and how if you know how to work with the nervous system and use yoga in that way, you can actually work with those types of people. So we talk about what subtle yoga is, how you can start adding more things from the subtle practices of yoga into your classes, and really the importance of slowing down. And when I recorded this episode a couple of months ago with Kristine, I remember thinking this is such an important lesson, and re-listening to it again to get this up for you guys, I was reminded again of how important this really is. So I hope that you really enjoyed this episode, and without further ado, here's Kristine. Kristine, welcome to the podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here with me.
I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much I want to talk about with your business, with subtle yoga, your whole journey kind of in the yoga space. But before we get there, let's back up a little bit. Can you tell me how you first got into yoga?
Well, I had a hippie social studies teacher in 6th grade, and we had yoga club. We were like, yogurt, like we didn't know what yoga was. I was like 11 or something, or 12. And I remember going to this class, and the first time, and I was with all my little girlfriends, and we were all kind of making fun of it because it just seemed like an old hippie thing. This would have been in the 70s and late 70s. And so anyway, I remember being in that class, and the main thing I remember from it is lying in Shavasana and having my lovely hippie social studies teacher guide us through kind of a little yoga nidra. And I remember at the end of that feeling like I was kind of out of my body and in a different dimension, and I had no context for understanding what had happened, except that it felt really good. And it was a level of relaxation, and not even relaxation. It was like a, kind of an altered state that I got into. And that happened every time I went to yoga club, and I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't know anything about it. But there were things that I learned in that class that I kept doing all throughout high school when I was, like playing tennis and running, doing things that were not related to yoga, but there were things in that class that I kept doing to help myself fall asleep at night and, just to feel more relaxed and peaceful. And I still do some of the things I learned from the social studies teacher, I don't know, it's more than 40 years later, I still do some of the things I learned from her. So that's how I got interested in it. And then I left yoga for a while. And then when I was in college, a good friend of mine, we were close friends in actually the last year of college, and then we went to grad school together. And her name is Maria Kirsten, and I hope you interview her sometime because she became a yoga teacher too, and she's a well-known yoga teacher in Australia. Her work is called Yoga for Grown-Ups. So anyway, here we are in college, with all of these problems that you have in your early 20s, like just self-esteem issues. I had depression. I had body image issues. I had eating disorders, but they were much better at that time. But, when I was in high school, I had bad eating disorders. So anyway, Maria would be like, come on, let's go to yoga. And I'd be like, yoga? You gotta be kidding me. This is the late 80s. And she would take me to yoga class. And I remember the same thing being like, oh yeah, I need to do, this is good for me. I need to do this. And even though it's a little embarrassing. And Maria and I we did yoga in the gym. We were at Georgetown University, and we did yoga in the gym on those thick blue wrestling mats.
Oh my gosh.
And we had a real swami. Our teacher was a real dude, like in white robes. I don't know where he came from. I don't even remember his name. He would say things like contractor anus, like it was weird stuff at that time. But that got me into it. And then after grad school, I moved to California. I was in San Francisco. There were like 2 yoga studios in the whole town. There was the Iyengar Institute. And then I think, actually, I can't remember his name, Rodney Yee's partner. I think that they had a yoga studio in Berkeley, but I was living in San Francisco, and I was studying Chinese medicine and acupressure, and I had a teacher named Michael Gok, and he would teach us Acu yoga. So I learned all this Acu yoga when I was in San Francisco in the early 90s. And then I just had this really strong urge to travel and live in Asia. So I moved to Japan in like 92, I think it was. And I lived in Asia for 4 years, and I worked in Japan, and I was very much into yoga then. I was going to like yoga classes in Japanese and not knowing what they were talking about, but just following, follow the leader kind of yoga. And I was really exploring. I was going to many different different yoga classes, but also just like exploring spirituality when I was in Asia. And I did that for 4 years, and that led me to India. So I spent time in different ashrams in India studying and just living in that culture, which is so different, Yeah. And then when I got back to the States, it was 1995. And that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to teach yoga. And that was it, and I just started from there.
Wow. I love that. I feel like it's so cool that you had this like around the world journey, that you lived in Japan and did yoga. I feel like that must have been so cool. And then going to India to do yoga in the 90s must have been pretty cool as well. It's like, okay, I've studied this for like long enough. It's like time for me to become a teacher.
Well, also in India in the 90s, it was like, okay, you sit and you meditate. It was there was a lot of that at all the ashrams I went to. It was like a lot of meditation, and then I'd be like, can I learn some asanas? And they would be like, okay, yeah, like we'll do that later. Asanas were very much a secondary thing. So I really came to yoga from this meditation perspective. I loved I would sit zazen when I was in Japan. I tried that, which wasn't for me, but they would come over and they would hit you on the back with this big bamboo stick, and it was like an honor to get hit with the stick because what they were doing, it didn't hurt, well, it kind of stung, but it didn't leave a mark or a bruise or anything like that because it was a very flexible stick, and they did it to like loosen up your muscles, Mm-hmm. So, like I had this very much introduction to meditation more than asanas first, and then I learned some asanas when I was in India, but it wasn't very systematic or organized or anything like that. I wasn't down in Krishnamacharya's shala or anything. I was up in the north, and I kind of was all over India, but that was one of the places I spent a lot of time. And then when I got back to the States, that's when I was like, I really need to learn. I knew enough to teach something, but I really needed to start studying more when I got back. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so after you did your teacher training, did you start teaching right away in San Francisco?
There were no teacher trainings back then, except Iyengar. There was nothing. It was just like I lived in an ashram in India, in several ashrams, and learned how to do some yoga, and I got back and I was like, hey, I can teach this stuff. It's not right. So I started teaching, and then I did a sort of an intensive meditation asana training thing, but it wasn't even called a yoga teacher training, but I did an intensive training somewhere in Mexico in 95. And it was very like old school, kind of devotional, lots of meditation. Here's how the asanas and the meditation fit together, study the philosophy. It was that sort of stuff, So there were not teacher trainings where I was. When I got back to New Jersey in 1995, there weren't like teacher trainings or anything. They weren't common. I know Jiva Mukti started some in New York City, like in the late 90s, but I was already teaching, and I was like, I don't want to teach that stuff. That was so not me, the kind of lots of flowy, dancey music and sunset. Like that was not what I had learned or what I had really valued from my time in India. It was really the slow, mindful movement that compelled me so much. So I wasn't going to do that kind of training. And then Iyengar too, I was like, that's not for me. Like that's good stuff, but it's not my stuff.
Mm-hmm. So it was, which is totally fine.
Yeah. So I was taking Vinay yoga classes in Philadelphia, and I was teaching. And by the time, and like I said, I did some informal training. So 1999, Yoga Alliance was established, and there were a bunch of us that just grandfathered in grandmothered in,
Yeah.
at that time, because I'd been teaching by then for, 4 years.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting to just hear and to think about how much, like, I guess the quote unquote industry has changed, I guess,
yeah.
20 years. Just like, considering the fact of like you study and then you become a teacher, which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Like you clearly knew a lot about what you were going to teach, but it's just so different now in terms of like you can choose from, thousands upon thousands of different teacher trainings and all different styles offered, everywhere around the world versus like, oh yeah, there was no teacher trainings. And like to think about San Francisco that way is crazy.
Yeah, San Francisco, there were like 2 studios. I remember I used to ride my bike by one in my neighborhood. There was hardly anything. There was the Iyengar Institute and another one and one in Berkeley. And like, that was it. Yoga was not the thing. I was studying Chinese medicine in San Francisco. And then when I got back to New Jersey in 95, I studied more. I did like 1,000 hours of bodywork therapy training. So there were those, and I studied homeopathy for 3 years, so there were those of us who were very steeped in body and anatomy and bodywork stuff. And that's a transferable skill to understanding a lot about kinesiology and movement, and that's certainly what many of us were doing back then. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't consider to pursue my training, because I did. I started studying, training with many different teachers when workshops started to happen, which was like in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I would go to all the workshops of any big teacher that came to town. And then I also did 500 hours with Gary Kraftso and Vinny Yoga, so like I'll never stop studying. That's always, I'm the student first,
Yeah, lifelong learner. I love that. And so at what point did you get the idea for your business, Subtle Yoga?
So what was happening was that I was living in New Jersey and working in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, like kind of in between New York and Philadelphia, because that's the area that I'm from. And so I was teaching at a nursing home. I had a really nice job, a couple of days a week. I had 4, sometimes 8 classes that I would teach to residents of the nursing home and assisted living facility. And I also had a big space there that the public could come in. And I would teach classes to the public a couple times a week. So I had this great thing going in New Jersey, and I just really didn't pay that much attention to what was going on in the yoga industry around me. In 2001, we moved to Asheville, North Carolina. And Asheville, you may or may not know, is kind of like a very much a hotbed of yoga, and has been.
I've been there.
Yeah. It's been a hotbed of yoga since the 90s. So I got here and I was like, whoa, I have no idea. I had no idea all this was going on, the flow yoga scene, the vinyasa stuff. And I tried to, recreate what I'd been doing in New Jersey, but I just didn't have any luck at facilities. It's more, I would say, the community in Asheville, the medical community in Asheville at that time, and even now to a certain extent, was a little more conservative than what I had experienced in the Northeast. And then also the yoga community was very much well established and very deeply entrenched in this kind of fitness yoga stuff. So I thought, okay, I don't know how to do this. So, I don't know how to make a living teaching the slow, subtle stuff I've been teaching. So I'll just try and figure out how to teach this vinyasa. It's not rocket science, So I kind of figured out how to do it, and I had a limited amount of success. But I was actually asked to be the director of the yoga program at the YWCA. This was like in 2003 or something. And so I was working with my students, and, one day I came in and it was rainy, I remember, and there weren't very many people there. And I said to them, okay, what would you like to do today? And one of my students said, we want to do what you do at home for your practice. So we've been talking about that. Like, they've been saying, like, we think she does something different than she teaches us. And I was like, you want to do what I do at home? Are you sure? And they were like, yeah. And so I took them through, like, my home practice, my slow, mindful practice of different things that I would do at home. And at the end, they said, can we do that every week? And so I was very surprised because I thought everybody wanted hot, fast, sweaty fitness stuff. And when I got that kind of feedback, I was like, oh, maybe there are people who are interested in this stuff. And so it was from there that I thought I need to name it something different. I wasn't just going to say hatha yoga. Like a lot of times people who taught more old school would call it hatha yoga. I didn't want to do that. So I called it subtle yoga because really I was always very interested in the subtle body, in the chakra system, and the practices that are slow and mindful and subtle and how they lend themselves to a deeper, that deeper state, that kind of altered state that I had experienced as a child. That's what I was trying to, express or trying to share. And so subtle yoga seemed like a really appropriate name for that.
Yeah. That sounds awesome. I feel like it's really interesting that the response was a bit like challenging at first, because I feel like, nowadays it's like you see that on pretty much every schedule at yoga studios, I think in a lot of places kind of around the world. Have you noticed like the shift of the way that people are more responsive to what you offer now? Like, has it become easier to, I guess, get people to classes, convince them of why they should like slow things down and that sort of thing?
I would say that there have been numerous factors that have created more of a fertile environment for the acceptance of slow mindful practices. I would say there's numerous factors. One of them is just that the aging of the yoga community, people who started doing vinyasa in the late 90s or the early 2000s, when really that bell curve was starting to peak or starting to rise at least. I think those people have experienced a lot of injuries. We've seen a rash of hip replacements among yoga teachers, for example, and a lot of that is coming from really exploiting hypermobility. And so you have this, this aging, the population is aging a little bit. You also have the baby boomers and the Gen Xers that are starting to age and are very interested in self-care. And then I would suggest that the biggest piece here, the thing that has been the, really the Rosetta Stone for me, is helping, is the neuroscience that has helped us to understand that there is value in these practices that's different than the value you get from hot, sweaty exercise. And as you can start to explain that to your students, you start to get more buy-in from them. And when you can explain it to healthcare professionals, you start to get more referrals from them. So there is a shift that's happening, and I think the shift has happened for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of factors that have coalesced to create more of a positive environment for this. Because what I was experiencing back in the early 2000s was a lot of there's no point in this, or this is just watered down real yoga. I mean, I can't tell you the comments that I used to hear back then, and I don't hear them anymore. But back then, it was things like, can you tell me where I can go to a real yoga class? and this isn't real yoga. And I mean, and this doesn't do anything for me. I've had people say, I don't understand the value of what you teach. I mean, whoa. It was really tough. It was really tough back then to convince people, because the push, the wave, the momentum, the trend was all towards harder, faster is better. Mm-hmm. Harder and faster is better. If you can nail those hard poses, you are a good yoga teacher. And Amanda, let's be frank here. There's still a lot of that out there. A lot of it. You see it all over Instagram, so there's still a lot of misconception out there about the value of slow mindful practices. And that's part of what I'm, what my business is about now, is that educational piece of helping people to understand that the time they spend slowing down, it's just as important as any other self-care practice that they engage in. It's so important to their health, and they deserve it, and it's not a waste of time. It's actually central to your health and well-being, and particularly in this really amped up culture that we're living in.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really interesting to kind of hear like the difference in response between like the early 2000s and now, because I think there's like, I hear from a lot of people that are like, oh, yoga's too asana based. It's so focused on, everyone wants to do a handstand thanks to Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. And I feel like, yes, that is a thing that's there, but I also feel that there's a strong group of yoga teachers who are very much like educating their students about the importance of the other aspects of yoga, like the mindfulness practice, the breath work, the fact that doing a handstand doesn't make you a good yogi, quote unquote, and that sort of thing. So it's kind of interesting to hear that this has been like, a thing for so long. And I feel like hopeful that maybe it's kind of coming around a little bit. Like it's still existing, but like, people are starting to get more like our world is so fast paced. Like, let's slow it down a little bit. Like that's important to your health.
Yeah, I think I think it's really exciting. I think we're at the beginning of the bell curve still, though. I think, when you scroll through Facebook and you'll see people like yoga for a healthy core, yoga for kicking your butt or whatever. There's a lot of that's still out there, and that's very common. And even though people kind of rail against like that it still garners a lot of attention. I remember reading a study years ago that said when you watch people do things that you can't do with your body, it fires the pleasure centers in your brain.
That's interesting.
Right. I remember reading that and I was like, yeah, that explains a lot of it. It explains a lot of it. And with all due credit, people who are elite athletes and who are capable of doing that kind of yoga, I give them all credit. It's a beautiful thing to be able to accomplish. I don't want to take anything away from it. But here's the thing. If you're a yoga teacher, or you just came out of a yoga program, or you're considering becoming a yoga teacher, if that's your target market, you have a small target market there. Mm-hmm. There's not a lot of people who can do that kind of yoga. Between 4 and 13% of the population is hypermobile. So that's your percentage. And by the way, most of them are already yoga teachers, so they're not going to come to your classes. And then, if that's the kind of yoga you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. But in terms of teaching, there's 90% of the population in the United States that is not doing any yoga at all. Yeah. And many of those people, 6 out of 10 American adults, have a chronic disease. And so if you want to make a living teaching yoga, I would suggest spending time getting to understand those specific populations and how what you do can serve them. And I don't think elite athlete yoga, there's really a big market for it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even like if you consider athletes, like they already have so much intensity in their lives. Like I think there's also a need for like slowing it down, breathing, meditating. And sure, like I feel like a lot of athletes, obviously people who are more gymnastics, acrobatic, maybe doing like the crazy stuff with their body. Like, yes, they're quite mobile. But if you think about like a team of hockey players, for example, like they need some like slow stretching. Like they don't need to like sweat it out. Like that's what they do on the ice every single day.
Right.
So even with them, it's like there's this side of it that needs to be, I think, more slower, mindful. Like that's the thing that I think we really need as a society.
And there is ample evidence. I would say there's a growing evidence base to show how important the slow, mindful movement with awareness is for creating positive neuroplastic changes in the brain and the nervous system. It helps to create resilience in the nervous system, which is what we are really called for, what we're really tasked to provide, I think, as yoga professionals, is helping people to develop greater resilience in the nervous system. And you get a certain skill set out of fast, sweaty exercise, and it's excellent for your health. There's tons of research on it. Mm-hmm. But there are different skills that you're developing when you're moving slowly and mindfully, which create different brain changes and have a different, they're running along different afferent nerve pathways than the fast, sweaty stuff. So so to be able to distinguish it, now of course there's some overlap, but to be able to distinguish it and say, look, when we're doing this, we're creating more map differentiation in the brain, and that map differentiation is really good for, and that awareness, that map differentiation is really good for the nervous system. It has different effects and different than the cardiovascular exercise stuff. But, for 50 years, the United States and Western culture has been bombarded with these messages about exercise. And that started in 1969 with Kenneth Cooper's aerobics revolution stuff. Mm-hmm. So like we've had that message. That message is so loud and clear in our culture: exercise, exercise, exercise. And even though that message is so loud and clear, only 20% of the American population actually engages in any exercise.
Right.
So, so we've got that loud and clear message. The new message that I believe that's arising from the scientific community is this need for slow, mindful movement, as well as mindfulness practices in general. This as a countermeasure to so much of the fast stuff that we deal with in our culture, of course, but also as a way to build greater resilience in the nervous system. And I think that we're just at the beginning of the bell curve of that understanding. And, with the bell curve, when you get up to that, you start with the innovators, and then the early adopters. And I would say we still have a long way to go before we get more buy-in for this from the public, as well as from healthcare professionals. I can't tell you how many healthcare professionals I've worked with that I've explained this difference between fast movement, which typically has proprioceptive benefits, and then slow movement, which has interoceptive benefits. And as I've explained that difference, I can't tell you how many healthcare professionals I've worked with, physicians, who had no idea about that, the difference, and continue to put yoga in the exercise category. And as long as we keep putting it in the exercise category, we're not teasing out the unique benefits that give us a really strong argument for why these practices need to be promoted in various, private and wellness sector, private sector, and public sector arenas to be able to be accepted at the same level that exercise is accepted.
Right.
So I think we have to be careful not to lump it into the exercise category. I think we have to be careful not to do that. And if you want to do yoga exercise, it's fine, but call it something like that, And then, I wanted to use the word subtle yoga to differentiate from that fitness stuff, from the elite athlete stuff, from the exercise stuff, because that's not why I do these practices or why I teach.
Hey yogis, I just wanted to take a quick little break to talk about studio growth. Has your yoga studio's growth become stagnant? If you're like many studio owners I talk to, you've tried every marketing tactic under the sun. You started a blog, you're posting regularly on all the social media sites, running challenges, sending out newsletters, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, you're doing a ton of work and barely paying the bills. What if there was an easier way? A way to get new students regularly coming through the door without having to do so much work to get them there. A proven system that will consistently bring in 20 plus new paying students to your studio each and every month. Well, there is. Ron Medlin and his team at GetYogaStudents.com have developed a 3-step system that will help you quickly grow your yoga studio to a 6-figure profits and beyond without being shackled to your business. So if you're ready to grow fast and you'd like the blueprint to help you get started, visit GetYogaStudents.com today to get the exact system Ron and his team uses to help his yoga studio clients add 10, 20, or even 30 new students every single month. On top of that, you get a free 45-minute consultation session. So if you're kind of like, I'm not really too sure about all this, I don't want to fork out a bunch of money without even knowing if this is going to work, head on over to GetYogaStudents.com, book a free consultation, and just talk with Ron. He's got so much knowledge, and him and his team are willing to work with you with your studio's needs. And once again, it's getmoreYogaStudents.com to start getting more students in your yoga studio today. This episode is also brought to you in part by Punch Pass. You heard me talk about Punch Pass at the beginning of this episode, and I am so excited to be partnered with them. Before we continue with the episode, I wanted to tell you a couple more things about the software. So with Punch Pass, they have really done their best to make sure that you can focus on the business that you enjoy and let them take the hassle off your hands. And they've done so in a way that we can afford as businesses. One of the things that I love the most about Punch Pass is that they're a small business, just like you and just like me. And so they're made for us. They're not a big company that's just charging us a lot of money for the services. They understand that we're small businesses as yoga teachers, and they really want us to be able to do what we love, which is teach yoga. So if you've been looking for some sort of software that can make your yoga business a lot more simple, head on over to punchpass.com/MBOM to start your free trial today. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's like, I mean, subtle yoga is kind of like traditional yoga more so than like a lot of what's being taught in, big cities and big studios in North America. I feel like it's like a bit tough because there's so many different kind of like levels to look at it, I guess. And when I say that, I mean, there's a lot of people that are busy, and then they go to the gym before or after work and they want that like sweaty exercise. And for those people, it's like slowing it down a couple times a week is going to be hugely beneficial. And then there's the people who like aren't moving at all, where you're kind of just like, just do something, just do anything. Like, I don't really care what you do, just like start moving your body a little bit and that'll be beneficial. And then it's like, where does yoga fit into that? Like, is it exercise? Is it mindfulness? Is it somewhere in between? And it really feels like it's just its own category. Yet I think people are like, okay, you need to, like, they're at the doctor's and they're like, oh, your blood pressure is high and you've gained weight and you need to start exercising. And they're like, well, what do I do? Somebody's like, go try yoga. And it's like a great recommendation, but then it kind of gets lumped under that exercise category. And then there's so much yoga that it's like, do they end up at like a Bikram class or a power class, or do they end up at like a slow class, restorative? Like, what do they end up doing? Because that can also make a massive difference. So, yeah, it's a bit complicated.
I think the way that you just categorized it is really important because there are different ways. There's different ways that people climb up the same mountain. So yeah, there are getting into it for people that aren't exercising at all is really important. But what I will say about going back to the, to loop this back to the conversation about business, in my experience, working with lots of healthcare providers over the years, because one of the things I do is train healthcare, primarily mental health professionals in using yoga in their clinical practice. But I've worked with lots of allied health professionals over the years. And one of the things that continually happens is we have the same conversation that you just said. Is the doctor said, go do yoga. And the person goes to yoga and they end up at a class and they like injure their back, where they do, like the teacher wants them to do a one-arm handstand, and it's totally the wrong place for them. So what I think one strategy for, yoga professionals who are really committed to reaching out to these non-traditional populations for yoga is to make yourself an invaluable resource to the healthcare providers, because now we're getting data, we're getting these studies that have been coming out, meta-analyses, like good research studies that have been coming out talking about the benefits of yoga. And so the physicians are going to read that and they're like, I'm a physician. Most physicians I've met are like, I'm a physician. I don't have time for yoga. I just exercise, Mm-hmm. That's their thing. So if you can become a resource to the healthcare providers about what are the resources in your community, like what classes would be good for what kind of people, that is a way to get yourself referrals. You just become an educational resource. And for the most part, it's difficult to reach doctors directly, but you can often reach office managers and other people that are on the team. Office managers are often a good place to start with your promotional materials and, just with like, this is when I offer classes. These classes would be good for this population. Do you work with a lot of people, if you are specializing in, I don't know, let's say yoga for metabolism, for helping to balance metabolism and blood sugar, and you go to the diabetes clinic and you can offer yourself as a resource, you're much more likely to get referrals than if you're just kind of expecting people to show up because you put a flyer up that said yoga for diabetes, you know? So I think that connecting with healthcare providers and being in educational research is a really great strategy for people trying to make it in this industry in terms of their communities.
Yeah, absolutely. If there's people listening who I guess kind of are drawn more to the fast pace of yoga, and in terms of like fast paced teachers, like they like more vinyasa flow, maybe they're teaching like Ashtanga. What are some ways to kind of integrate like slower movements or things that are going to be, you know, beneficial to people slowing down without, I guess, totally changing their style?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think, you know, you can always integrate a few things in the beginning of practice. And there is nothing wrong with saving 15 minutes at the end of class for Shavasana, meditation, a little bit of pranayama, you know, that I think a lot of people really appreciate that. So there's ways that you can integrate. I also don't think you necessarily have to retrain. You know, I have a 40-hour online program that's specifically for yoga teachers to learn how to incorporate some of this stuff into their classrooms, because I do think the predominant style that is taught, that's kind of understood out there, remains vinyasa. I mean, vinyasa is still king. And you know, it's great. It's great. People love it. It's a great practice. And when we can bring some more slow, mindful stuff in, we're offering another benefit, you know, a different benefit than what, and it's not just the same thing as slowing down the flow. I should say that too. Slow flow is nice, but it's different. It's a different skill set when you really understand how to incorporate subtle practices and you have a different effect on the nervous system. You know, let me just say that when I'm putting together a class, when I'm thinking about what I want to offer my students that day, I'm thinking about the nervous system. I don't think from the hamstring perspective. I mean, that stuff kind of folds itself in naturally from the nervous system, but I start with the nervous system and how I want to help people to create more resilience in the system and to either kind of have a little more energy in the system, have a little more relaxation in the system, or something in the middle. I think about the nervous system, and I don't know that a lot of yoga teacher training programs teach students how to do that. And yet I think that's some of the most powerful work that we can do with the practice.
Yeah. And that's like stuff that you kind of have to be trained on. Like I know the teacher training I just finished, we did like the science of meditation. We looked at like the nervous system quite a bit, but I'm still not clear of if I could build a class around specifically like the nervous system per se.
Yeah, I do think it's a training thing. I would say I learned a lot of it from my studies of Vini Yoga, because Vini Yoga is very nervous system based. But I've also learned it in studies of lots of other somatic therapies that I've done over the years. So it's, you know, I think most people because we have kind of this default worldview of yoga as fitness, we go, okay, how are we going to stretch the hamstrings today? Or how are we going to straighten the back? Or how are we going to stretch the neck? Or how are we going to, you know, whatever body part we're going to work with. And there's nothing wrong with teaching from that perspective. But when you teach from a nervous system perspective, you're adding this whole other dimension to the human existence, which is a more subtle dimension of human existence. And yeah, I would say it requires a little more training to understand how to do it, that's one of the reasons I developed my online courses, so I could help teachers who already have their 200-hour to just learn a little bit more about the nervous system and the brain and be able to teach from that perspective, add some of that to what they're already doing.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I'll definitely make sure that there's a link for that in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I think that this is like really, really important stuff. Like, I think that slowing it down is like something that we need more of in the world in general. And like, that's even for myself, like coming from somebody who has a regular yoga and meditation practice and works for myself and sets my own schedule. It's like, it's still something I need.
Oh my God, me too. It's like my saving grace.
Yeah, like it's crazy how fast we can get into overdrive. And I think too, then you add like, I don't drink a ton of coffee, but then it's like you add coffee to the mix and your whole body's freaking out and you're just like, what am I doing to myself?
Right.
It's wacky.
Yeah. I mean, we are so on hyperdrive right now, in this world of hyperdrive, like that, one of the most luxurious things, one of the most important self-care things you can do is mindfully slow down. And it's not the same thing as watching Netflix and drinking a bottle of wine. Like that's different than active training of the nervous system. It's a different, those are different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of funny because after we did the science of meditation in my 300 hour, our like own work for the night was to go home and do nothing. And a couple of us, myself included, were like, what do you do when you do nothing? Like, what is doing nothing? What do you do to do nothing? And it's like kind of a concern for humanity. I feel like a group of yoga teachers are like, wait, but how do we do nothing? Somebody's like, can I listen to music? And she's like, that's not really doing nothing. Listen to music. And I was like, can I sit in the bath? And she's like, yes, you can do that. I was like, man, I'm so out of practice with doing nothing. Like you see little kids and I mean, babies, especially like they're still in development phase. They're constantly doing nothing, but you see like little kids where they'll just kind of like stare out the window or they'll just like sit there in thought. And you're like, what are you thinking about? You don't even speak a language yet. They're just contemplating. And I feel like it's a very like human thing to do it.
I totally agree. And we've lost the art of that. I think that's why I think these practices are so vitally important right now, and we need more people teaching them. Because there's plenty of people out there who can teach you how to stretch your hamstrings, but there aren't enough people who can teach you how to regulate your nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest business lessons that you've learned through your career as a yoga teacher? I know you've had like quite a journey between your practicing, your studying, your teaching, offering something that was like a little bit like people were like, what is this? And now stepping into this like thing that we really need. So do you have any big business lessons?
Well, I didn't know what I was doing with business. I really didn't have any business skills when I got into teaching yoga. So everything I learned was, along the way. But I think now, here's one thing I would say. The 20th century was an analog age and the 21st century is a digital age, so you need some kind of digital footprint. You need something out there that helps people to know who you are online. I mean, it's just the reality of how we're living. So that was a big lesson for me, was figuring out how I was going to reach more people with what I'm doing. And for me, that happened by taking my message, my mission online. I think that's been a big lesson. I think the other big lesson has been really trusting myself and realizing that what I do is valuable, even though, like 20 years ago when I was, or a little less than 20 years ago when I moved to Asheville, it was really easy for me to feel really down on myself. Like I'm not really thin. I don't have a really hypermobile body. I'm not really that, super athletic. I'm athletic, but it's just, I didn't have anything superlative about what I had to offer physically, and yet I knew that what I did was so beneficial. I just didn't understand how to explain it. It really wasn't until I started into the neuroscience research, which was 10 or 12 years ago, that I really started to get it. But, before then, I had a lot of self-doubt, so that was one of my big lessons too, is just being out there and being confident that I can do this. I can make it in this industry. And even if I'm doing something that doesn't feel like it's the trend, if I really believe in it and they do the right thing, then, my husband would always say to me, even if you're only helping one person, you've done something really valuable on this planet in this lifetime,
Yeah.
And it's so important. Like if you're passionate about this work, I think it's really important to have that confidence in yourself that you're teaching something really worthwhile. I also have a student who, a wise student, she's kind of also a mentor, who said to me, we can only teach yoga from the level that we understand it from. And that's good enough. She said, like, it's okay to teach yoga from that level, because you're not going to understand everything, and you're not going to learn everything in your lifetime, so you learn what you can and you teach from that place. And as long as you're teaching from that place of compassion and the focus is on safety and a place of ethics, then you're doing good in the world. And that was really important for me to hear too.
Yeah. Yeah. I love so much of what you're talking about. Like, I think that there's so many good things for people to remember. It's like, you don't have to look a certain way to be a yoga teacher. You don't even have to be like offering a certain thing to be a yoga teacher. Obviously, that's within the umbrella of yoga. Otherwise, you're definitely not a yoga teacher. But I think it's like good for people to remember when they kind of feel like, oh, maybe I'm not really fitting in with this. And I also agree about having a digital presence. But I think with that too, also finding like where your digital presence fits with your audience and your niche. Like, I've had so many people be like, I hate Instagram. Do I have to be on Instagram? I'm like, well, if there's no reason that it's like serving you or your business or your clients, then like, no.
Right.
There's not some like magic formula that says like to have a successful business, you have to be on Instagram. If you're trying to run an online business and reach people around the world, then like the answer is probably yes. But
Right. Yeah, and for a while I was like, okay, I got to get online. So I'd like do stuff on Facebook and do stuff on Instagram. I didn't know what I was doing, and so that's the other piece to it, is if you can get some help, then getting help is a good idea. I don't want to be a techie person. Like, that's not my skill set. I farm that out to other people.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great tip for sure. I think it's like really beneficial to hire people for things you don't like doing. Like, I hate doing my taxes. It does not bring me any joy. I'd rather pay somebody who like gets nerdy over that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And some things I do just because I want to know how to do them, but I'd rather somebody else does them. And I've been really intentional about getting other people to help me with things and not feeling like I can do everything myself, And then also just really trying to highlight my skills. Like, I love writing and blogging. And so I like prioritize that. I do that every week. And that's important. And people wait for my blog. They want, if they wait for them, but they open them and they know they're coming on Wednesday and they want to read my blog. So, so that's, you have to do what you're good at. And then the stuff that you're not so good at, if you get somebody else to help you with it, it really helps a lot. It takes a lot of the strain off of you, because it can be very overwhelming, don't you think? Like, between all the social media platforms, and I mean, it's so overwhelming.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's like when I sit down to look at my month, I'm like, okay, private Facebook group, Instagram. I like stopped doing Twitter basically as soon as I created an account, because I was like, nope, not doing this. It's like Instagram, Facebook, newsletter, podcast episodes. And then I'm like, oh yeah, okay. So like, where am I actually making my money from?
Right.
Like, that's just kind of the top of my sales funnel type stuff that gets people aware of me. And then it's like, okay, my courses and one-on-ones, like that stuff needs to be out there and doing well. Like, it's so easy to get caught up in all that stuff. So yeah, definitely know what that's all about.
And I think also, so I mentor teachers sometimes, not a lot, but I do with some teachers. And what I've noticed is like the business model oftentimes is still very 20th century. Like, I was working with somebody last week who was like, oh, I'm going to put up flyers because I want to do this restorative class. And I was like, flyers? That is not how you're going to reach people. I mean, maybe a flyer here and there if a lot of yoga people go to that place, but in general, like, you need clear strategies for these things, particularly when you're in a saturated market. You're not going to have, people aren't going to show up for workshops in a saturated market unless they have a really good reason to, and you've very much targeted your marketing to them. So, those things, getting clear on those things are really important. I also think that there's lots of people are doing very well with one-on-one yoga and digital, virtual yoga. Over Zoom or over Skype, or people putting YouTube videos up and getting clients that way. So those are great ways to find people that may not be in your locale. They might not be in your community, but you could still reach them. You could still reach people with your unique message.
Yeah.
Across the airwaves. And I think it's possible, I think those models are actually emerging, and they're working for a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple of online privates that I do with people in the UK, and it's like, I don't know, it's so cool to be able to teach people that are across the ocean from me. It's like pretty amazing world that we live in, for sure.
Yeah, it is. So there's lots of opportunities, but it is a matter of not getting overwhelmed by it and having a very clear strategy, because otherwise you just spend your whole day, poking around here and there on social media. So I think that was one mistake I made when you were talking about lessons I learned. That was one mistake I made, of just not knowing what the heck I was doing on social media and just kind of putting things all over the place. And I really wasn't doing myself or anybody any good with that.
Right. It's like throwing spaghetti at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, exactly.
After some time, you're going to either run out of spaghetti or your arm's going to get tired. So if you could give the new yoga teachers out there listening one tip for starting their yoga career, what would that be?
Well, you sure you want to hear this?
Yeah, I am sure.
My one tip would be, if you really want to teach yoga, get a healthcare license.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
Yep. Go become a nurse, an occupational therapist, physical therapist, a licensed professional counselor, a licensed clinical social worker, physician's assistant, whatever it is. Because, I'm thinking in terms of the United States, of course, but with what's going on with our healthcare crisis and the need to get yoga and mind-body practices into the healthcare system, I believe that you have a better chance and you have more versatility with that kind of a degree. So, it totally depends. Like, for some people, that's really lousy advice, but if you're a young new yoga teacher and you have any proclivity for science whatsoever, if you don't have a proclivity for science, then you can get into the mental health care world. But getting in that door somehow, I have so many students who have said to me, I want to do yoga therapy training. And I'm like, that's great. And if you have a patron or a very rich partner or a trust fund, then great, go for it. And if you need to make money, I'm sorry, but that right now, that profession is not developed enough. I mean, I'm all for advocating for it. I went to Washington, D.C. in March. I went to Capitol Hill to advocate for yoga therapy. Like, I'm all about it, getting it into the healthcare system. I'm
right.
Completely and support. I support the International Association. I'm completely devoted to that. And at the same time, the reality is the jobs are not there. And so you have to put your stake in the ground and make a choice. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you got to go for it. And it's the entrepreneur's life with all the ups and downs. If that's not your thing, because for many people that's not their thing, then you're going to be better off having a license under which you can share these practices. And I know lots and lots of people who are doing it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, getting like a quote unquote full-time yoga job, like those are kind of few and far between at this point. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's definitely interesting. And I think too, there's people listening from all over the world. So definitely do research around that based on the country that you're in. I know in Canada, since healthcare is public, which we by no means have a perfect system up here. But I think, since healthcare is public, there's a little bit more disposable income to spend on yoga. So there's that. There's also many companies that are now, if you have like benefits with your company, they're now just giving you kind of like an account with the amount of money that you can spend on any type of fitness, and yoga is always included in that. So so for one of the yoga studios that I manage, like people will just say like, hey, can I grab my receipt for, my monthly membership or for the 10 pass I purchased or those series of prenatal classes I did, so that I can expense them under my benefits plan. Again, that like going to depend on what company you're with, what benefits plan you're under, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff in there, but something for yoga teachers to keep in mind is that, at least I know in my community in Canada, it's starting to be recognized a little bit more as something that you can use just as much as your like gym membership or, private consultations at a gym.
Oh, you Canadians, you're so forward thinking.
on some things. That's a conversation for another podcast episode, though. Maybe another podcast in general.
But yeah, I mean, that is rare here, although I have heard about it happening, the fitness membership stuff from some healthcare providers. But, the United States, we are just a mess when it comes to healthcare right now. I mean, we're in a massive, massive healthcare crisis, and the healthcare system is just a disaster here, as you know.
Yeah.
So it's on the table. The conversation is happening, and then there are different forces that are looking for innovative solutions. So yoga certainly is one of the innovative solutions, and really where it shines is in the prevention sector. Or the prevention area of the health sector is that. I mean, that's where yoga is really so beneficial and so powerful. But also, Dean Ornish's work is all based on therapeutic yoga and yoga lifestyle, and he's got lots of great outcomes in the treatment part of the healthcare sector. So, there are different ways that we can use it, but we're not at the place in the United States where there's widespread acceptance yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for fighting for our fellow yoga teachers, myself included. It's definitely important. We need more of this for sure. Yeah. If people want to learn more about Subtle Yoga, maybe take a training with you, look you up in Asheville, where can they go to find you?
Well, online, subtleyoga.com. So I have lots of different online courses. I have 4 courses right now. And then I also have courses at Yoga U online. I've been teaching for them for, 13 or 14 years. And then I have a couple of trainings on the ground here in Asheville, including twice a year I do a Subtle Yoga community training. Yeah, and I would definitely encourage your listeners to join the Subtle Yoga community on Facebook. It's a nice group of people with just real friendly, supportive environment and lots of great suggestions. And just, it's a great hive mind place.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation, Kristine. This has been awesome.
Thank you, man. That's been great talking to you.
All right, that's the episode with Kristine Weber from Subtle Yoga. I hope that you guys are feeling inspired to go slow things down, maybe do a little bit of nothing and learn a little bit more about the nervous system and how we can both impact that for ourselves and for our students. Of course, you can find information on the show notes at mbomyoga.com. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. And of course, you can join the private Facebook community at Yoga Business Badasses, where we're talking about all different types of things that impact our businesses. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, make sure you reach out, info@mbomyoga.com. I always love to hear from you guys. Otherwise, I will see you next week. Thanks so much for listening. Namaste.